The first time I ever read today's verse we see in the first reading, which you will find in, as I always say, your daily missal or at bible.usccb.org or any other place that'll give you the daily reading. Of course, you can look it up in the Bible. And that's Colossians 1:15 through 20. I was in the habit of reading the Bible. I remember at this time, I'm coming back to the church. I had probably been back in the church, I guess maybe about a year. And this is back in 1980, so this is long before the public use of the internet. It was only used at that point by the education and military communities and some other maybe military contractors. But it wasn't used in the popular way that obviously it has been done since the early 1990s. And in light of that, I didn't have the internet. So what I used to do for reading the Bible was I carried a Bible in my back pocket. And when, I had time sitting someplace, including, yes, the John, I would read the Bible. And I just found, very interesting and fascinating and, prayerful and everything else. But then I came to this verse, and this powerful verse is just fascinating in itself, because it really tells us who Jesus Christ is. And so as I looked at it, I was like, wow. Now, let me kind of switch that for a minute. I was, at the time, attending, where was I then? Yeah, I was attending Mass at St. Charles Borromeo in Point Loma, California. I always tell you that's the parish I came back to church. Well, right across the street at the time was the Marine Corps Recruit Depot. And one of our parishioners was the commandant of that base. So I always knew him as fellow parishioner, wonderful guy, the whole bit. And on Thanksgiving Mass, we did a whole procession, in a sense, during Mass of things for which we were thankful during the offertory. And he showed up carrying the flag, dressed in his full Marine General uniform. And I saw him differently for the first time, because I always knew him. I forget what his name was, but I always knew him as Joe. And all of a sudden we see him as General Joseph, So it was fascinating. And this was the same thing, because I had learned, as I teach on this channel all the time, to have this relationship with Christ, to know Christ, as he says, as a friend, as someone who is reaching out to us, as someone who is leading us to salvation, as someone who is calling us to salvation. And then at the same time, I see this passage, and all of a sudden it's a description of who Jesus actually is. That what we're looking at is, or what we understand Jesus, this person we have contact with, this divinity we pray to, and everything, is the image of the invisible God. He is God, and he is through all things. Everything is created, and including dominions and powers and rulers, and he is the monarch, I guess is a word I could use, of all. And that's who Jesus is. And it really was, it hit me very intensely in the same way. And I was like, well, this is who we are praying to. It's a fascinating thought, because we understand that this is the one who called us to have a relationship with him, and yet at the same time, this is the God who is the second person of the Trinity. He is the one who reaches out and calls us friends, but he is God. And that's what struck me. So that's what our reading is today, and it's a great thought of a reading as we go into the weekend, that powerful moment when we come to understand that we are in relationship with the Son of God. This is the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Welcome you to this. My name is Father Robert J Carr, and I am teaching you today. Again, we don't have we don't have an interview today. We've got me. And this gives us an opportunity to discuss the readings and some of the issues that are hitting our world. So fascinating that this is not only who we pray to, as we see in today's first reading, this is who we represent to others on the earth. And this is a powerful moment, and it's one in which we seek the living God and represent him. I'm doing a little research for over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. I'm responding to yet another column on hell that someone wrote. And again, I noticed this is something I have a real struggle with the people who are pushing hell all the time. Not necessarily that that's what this person does, but you see people who are, hell, and, I drove down the street the other day and there was a group of a local non-Catholic church. I don't know what church it was. And they're, holding up placards that say Jesus loves you and the whole bit, but also, that one of, heaven or hell, what do you choose as your destination? And and of course, one of the things that I always get frustrated in when I see some of these columns on hell is, why doesn't anyone talk about how not to end up there? Giving you another way to put it, there are people that are teaching about hell and you have to make the right decision, you have to do this and you have to do that. And it's all rooted on you. You have to work really hard to get to heaven. That's not what Jesus teaches. So let me give you an opposite to it. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. That's what Jesus teaches. And then other people saying you have to work hard. Remember, Catholicism is not easy. Well, then what about my yoke is easy, my burden is light? Then how do we look at that in light of those words? And you hear that a lot, and it's all focused, again, on you working hard enough to get to heaven. And if you don't work hard, work hard enough to get to heaven. And if you don't work hard enough, you're going to end up in hell. That's not what the gospel teaches. And it's Jesus, who we understand is the second person of the Trinity, is the King of all, is the one without whom we wouldn't have rulers and leaders, because he is the head of all these rulers and leaders and everything else. Let me see. How is it expressed? He is the creator of all these thrones and dominions or rulers or powers. It is through him this power comes, and we're turning around and saying we have to work really hard so that we will please him enough that he will let us into heaven. That doesn't make any sense, because he does everything he can to lead us into heaven. So we respond to his grace, which is always calling out to us. And we bring our issues to prayer, and we bring our difficulties to prayer, and even our disagreements with church teaching. I was talking to someone the other day in the hospital. It's fascinating how many times this happens. in the hospital bus in general, and person says, well, I don't necessarily believe in everything the church teaches. And I sarcastically responded, you're the first person that's ever said that to me. And I smiled because, church teaching is there. And you've got people saying, you have to believe this, or you're not Catholic, or you're going to hell. But what the church actually teaches us is to bring it to prayer, to seek to understand why the church teaches what it teaches, because it comes through 2,000 years of, actually 6,000 years of wisdom. That begins with asking the question, what does the church actually teach? And as you hear me say all the time, the church, you're not going to find church teaching. You're not going to find church teaching on these forums on different places. You're not going to find it on X. You're not going to find it on YouTube. You're not going to find it on Reddit. I mean, you're going to find bits of it, but it's not going to be fully accurate, because you have to go to church teaching to understand church teaching. And you're not going to find it from someone who's quoting some obscure passage from some document from the 12th century. You're not. You need to understand what the church teaches, and that comes through prayer. And I guarantee you, most of what people write on the internet and say on YouTube is not accurate, because they only give this tiny focus of what the church actually teaches, because they do what is known as proof texting. Or proof texting is when you use a particular text as proof of what you're saying. So it's not, this is what the church says, this is what I say, and let me show you where it says in the Bible that what I say is correct. That's proof texting. And so they don't give the full teaching, the deepest part, the pastoral part, the whole bit. And so you get this teaching that sounds like it's accurate, but it's not. And then you add to it, well, I'm not working hard enough to come to heaven. And you're missing the whole point of today's readings, that Jesus is calling us, and he gives us the grace to follow him. We're going to talk more on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast on your favorite podcast platform. You can now leave a message for us, which we can air and discuss on this program. Just call 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. 617-297-7452. Feel free to call, leave a comment, a question, or even feedback, and we may play it on the air. I can discuss your comment or question as well, so give that a try. 617-297-7452, 617-297-7452. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back. And so we're talking about this powerful moment that I read in today's reading. And so we look at that. That's who we follow. That's who we represent, and we are called to be in relationship with Christ. And I know there are people saying, oh, that's Protestant. No, that isn't. That's Catholic. So we're called to be in relationship with Christ. And one of the things I think of, because remember, I'm a hospital chaplain, so daily I work with God's grace, and I bring the sacrament. This is an example of this whole Jesus reaching out to us. I bring the sacrament, which is, that manifestation of God's grace, to people in their most difficult time, because they're in a hospital. I got this habit finally got myself out of as I first started, was to say, how are you? And if you really think about it, well, they're in a hospital. You can probably get a clue. But people will say to me, when I walk in, how are you? And I'll say the real question is, how are you doing today? And that's one of the things I'll change that. But there are people who are seeking the sacraments, who, say, yeah, I really want all the prayer. I want the sacraments that you can give to me because I, am sick right now and I want to get back to be healed. And so that's what I do. I bring the sacrament of the sick. But what is the sacrament of the sick? Christ reaching out to them. And not so much me reaching out to them, Christ reaching out to them, because who am I? I am his representative. And that's what's going on. And we have Eucharistic ministers. We have others. Who are they? They are his representative. And that's whom we represent. And therefore, it is a powerful moment, what we are doing, and it's a representative of what Christ is doing. He is reaching out to us. What is it the church teaches about why you go to church? Is it because I'm going to work hard to get to church and that's what I have to do? Well, good for you. But why you actually go to church? Because the Holy Spirit leads you there. So this is an interesting thing. We are in God's world, and today's reading gives us that understanding of who God is. We are in God's world, and God leads us to his healing, to his love. And so we recognize that. And he is reaching out to us, and we are responding. And you want to be careful of those people who are teaching that whole thing of, you have to work hard, and give you no understanding of having a relationship with Christ until you die and standing in front of the throne. We are in relationship with Christ. And if you're going through a difficult time of whatever, whether you're going through, problems in the family, whether you're going through health problems, whether you're going through financial problems, whatever, always bring your problems to Christ. Always bring that to Christ. Always bring that in your prayer. Don't fall into the trap that you're called to fight this alone. And, you don't fall into that trap. So when we look at that, we understand that we seek to follow Christ and to love Christ and do what Christ is calling us to do. We see his work, but we also understand who he is, which is what we see in today's reading. And that's what we're called to do. Now, I think part of the problem that one of the things we can say in our country today is we've got a lot of turmoil, and we're seeing that in the world, is people aren't praying, they aren't learning to pray. They aren't learning of prayer. One of the things that we're seeing is this whole thing of, again, that understanding that people have to work hard and they have to do this, that, and the other thing, and we want to get people to be more moral, and we want to, okay, fine. But we're not teaching of prayer. And as you know, I can be very critical of traditionalist circles. Traditionalist is not the same thing as tradition. I come from a background of tradition in the military. The Navy is all tradition. They teach you that from day one. So I love tradition, and I love the tradition of the church, but traditionalism takes the traditions and teaches in a way that the traditions were never taught. And so we look at that and we understand that traditionalism is different than traditions. And what you see in this traditionalism is you have to work harder in order to know Christ. No, you've got to be a person of prayer. St. Alphonsus Liguori teaches us you got to be a person of prayer and let that prayer teach you. As I told you, I used to read the Bible every day. That taught me so much. And I still read the Bible every day. I used to read a Bible in my back pocket every day that told me so much. And that's what I am interested in. That's what led me to deepen my faith. And that taught me about having that relationship, that prayer, that everything else. So all of this goes together. And it's something that I really think we need to learn more. Are you learning of prayer in your parishes? Is your priest teaching you of prayer, which if you go to the masses that I celebrate, the answer is yes. Is your priest teaching you a prayer, or is he teaching you morality? Remember, you can teach morality over at the Unitarian Universalist Church. And I'm not criticizing the Unitarian Universalist Church. They're not Catholic. They don't they don't like, how is it? They work a lot with philosophy and philosophers and everything else. They don't necessarily work with the Bible. That's true. That's right on their documents. So what I'm saying there is, you learn morality over at the Unitarian Universalist Church, because anyone who preaches on morality is not preaching Catholicism. They're preaching morality. And morality is a part of Catholicism only when we are working with wisdom, the wisdom of God. Because if you live traditional American morality, you may never do what Christ calls you to do. If you want to see an example of untraditional American morality, talk to anyone in the Catholic worker movement. They'll talk to you about what is not traditional American morality. Because what is traditional American morality based on? You work hard so that you can get to heaven. That's traditional American morality. And that's not necessarily what Catholicism teaches. Catholicism teaches is to know Christ, true Catholicism, to know Christ and to live in a way that glorifies God. That's a lot different than if you work hard, you will get to heaven, because traditional American morality also teaches if you work hard, you will be financially successful. But that's not what the church teaches. One of the reasons for idolatry, keep that in mind, is that people practiced idolatry in the Old Testament times because they saw others were successful and they worshiped other gods. So they say, if we worship other gods, we will be successful too. And so that's why they would worship other gods. And that would include some pretty nasty stuff they used to do, because they would follow pagan spirituality. But why? Because they wanted to be successful. But we only want to be as successful as Christ wants us to be. That's different. And that runs right in the face of traditional American morality. Because in traditional American morality, which is not Catholic, the whole idea is Christ wants us to be successful as we can be, because that's a sign that he is blessing us. Whereas traditional Catholic, or actually Catholic morality, teaches that the sign that God is blessing us is that we are drawing closer to him, and sometimes drawing closer to him, which means we may have to go through difficult times where we have to draw close to him, as I'll tell you in a minute, St. Rose used to say, as we draw closer to him and he leads us to understand him more. St. Rose makes that famous statement, which I talked to Father Hofer about, and that is that we come to know Christ, we see Christ, we come to know Christ, and in coming to know Christ, we come to realize that, as St. Rose says, if we understood how much our difficulties led us to Christ, we would ask for more of them. That was what she taught. So we understand that, but that's a whole different vision than traditional American morality, which is if you work hard, you're going to end up in heaven. Do you know one of the greatest saints in the church was homeless? It's true. Father Joseph LeBay, Thomas Merton talks about him. I've talked about him on here because the man was homeless. There it was. So he wasn't American. He lived long before, or not long before, but before the United States was founded. But he would not be considered successful in American morality, but he was considered a great saint in Catholicism. That's St. Joseph Labay. So we need to understand that our role is to be pleasing to Christ, and we can't be pleasing to Christ if we don't have him as a friend. But if we have him as a friend and we are pleasing to him, then we see everything differently. And if our whole morality is based on, I've got to work hard so I don't end up in hell, then that's not good morality. That's bad morality. That's not what we're called to do. So we understand who we are. We understand where we're called to be, and we understand that we're called to know Christ, to live Christ. And now we understand today's reading. Who is this Christ we're called to know? It's really powerful there. And understanding, especially when you see people who are Christ is reaching out to in their most difficult times, that Christ is leading. Christ is reaching out to them, even in their most difficult times, because that's what he does. That's what our sacraments are all about. Christ reaching out to us in our relationships with him. And why? Because even though he is the second person of the Trinity, he is in love with us as God, which is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, is in love with us. And therefore, despite his, I could put it this way, his high ranking, he wants to know us on a personal level, and that's what we believe in. So powerful teaching, and that we see in today's reading. And I told you, when I first saw it, it just shocked me. We're going to talk more on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Catholic Audio Media Podcast, and you already know that, so spread the word. Let other people know. Tell people that this is what you're listening to. We'll be back right after this. You can now leave a message for us, which we can air and discuss on this program. Just call 617-297-7452. That's 617-297-7452. 617-297-7452. Feel free to call, leave a comment, a question, or even feedback, and we may play it on the air. I can discuss your comment or question as well, so give that a try. 617-297-7452, 617-297-7452. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. We're back. So this weekend, I'm going to be preaching on understanding that we can't accomplish anything if we don't reach out and ask the Lord to help us. So that's what I'm going to be talking about based on the gospel for this weekend. And so it's going to be, that's my message. And then Monday we have the Nativity of Mary. By the way, the gospel this weekend is Luke 14:25 through 33. And then we're going to get into more of Colossians. So we're going to be doing that. So that's what's coming up next week. And, going through Paul's letter to the Colossians. Because as you know, I do work with the gospel at times on this program, but everyone knows the gospels, or for the most part, the ones who read their Bible, but not as many may know some of the first readings, and there are some powerful things there. And as I lead you through the first reading, I learn a lot myself. You know what they say, that if you really want to learn something, teach it. So I've been teaching this for years, as you know, on this podcast. So it's fascinating what we see there, and, understanding that the Lord is doing very powerful things for us, and we can look through the first reading over the 2-year cycle of the whole history of God reaching out to us. In any case, we will be returning to you on Monday, looking at the Nativity of Mary on the 8th of September. which always falls on that day, and then we will continue back into Colossians. Have yourself a blessed weekend, and we will see you on Monday.